I have a number out, so it must be, I know some are traveling for MEA, and a number are sick too already that time of year, and things, it turns cold and things happen right away. And I talked with Gloria, I think I mentioned that earlier, or prayed for Gloria Dunn, and with different heart issues, and she's at home. They hope to, get back as soon as they get their health back. And Diane DeSanto, I talked with her too this week, and so, yeah, lots of people to pray for, lots of needs out there in that, or with that. All right, there's some message notes. If you want to pull those out in your bulletin, feel free to look at those. As we just finished a two-part series on forgiveness and covered quite a number of things there. And like I mentioned, that's always one of the most needed messages in the world especially, but even in the church. And so we finished that. Going to start beginning of a new series. And you'll see it here in just a moment. But it's amazing how sometimes a little extra info can change your perspective. Reminds me of a guy who was going to meet his friend at a restaurant, and as he was walking in the restaurant, there were two gals standing by the door, and they looked at him when he walked by, and they said 9, and then they giggled, and he kind of puffed out his chest, and he went in and told his friend, he says, "You won't believe what just happened to me." He went by us these two gals, and they both said 9. And so that's pretty good on a scale of 1 to 10. If I'm a 9, and his friend said, "No." He laughed. He said, "Those two gals are German gals, and they don't speak English, so they were saying 9. No, kind of like a 0." And but interesting how low information can change your perspective on things. So, I've entitled this, for lack of a better title, "You Look Good in Rose-Colored Glasses Today." We have this one verse, I think you have it, 2 Corinthians 10:5. Yeah, there's, it's interesting how things look very different, don't they, when they, if you're looking through rose-colored glasses. Everything you look, of course, looks rose-colored. You have those on, you may think, why is she wearing rose-colored pants, whatever, to this, or why is that tough-looking guy wearing rose-colored gloves, what's going on? And of course, we know what's going on. Just you take off those glasses and you see they're really not rose-colored at all. But, everyone looks at the world through, if you want to call it that, some sort of glasses. But how do you know you have the right pair? And how are we to explain, some of the weird things going on? We have first this verse, 2 Corinthians 10:5. It says, "We use God's mighty weapons, not worldly weapons, to knock down the strongholds of human reasoning and to destroy false arguments. We destroy every proud obstacle that keeps people from knowing God. We capture their rebellious thoughts and teach them to obey Christ." And that's kind of a theme a little bit of this series of what it will be. As we look at how people look at the world, and how, and when we do so, it helps explain some of the strange things happening. For example, just recently at the British Museum, they put in a bunch of humans in a cage right next to, the monkeys, because they were just another, primates, just a little more evolved. Although sometimes you wonder if that, but they. And if if evolution's true, then it teaches that we are still evolving. It doesn't just stop; that we keep on evolving. And some are saying, well, the next step in our evolution is going to be the Borg. If you've heard of them, we're half human, half machine. Why would they think that? Or other strange things. For example, the push in more and more libraries. Maybe you've seen this, to have transgender guys come in and dressed up in all kinds of get-up to read transgender stories to the kids who've come to the library, little kids, for story time. And you see their pictures, and it's like, they look like they're going to Halloween. I mean, it's scary. And why would the libraries be almost falling over themselves to have this, to present that? Or other things like I think he's a sociologist, but he deals with ethics, kind of ethical scientist. Peter, what's his last, if I can remember, Singer. where he tries to convince us that not only is abortion just fine, but that it's even, and that it should be legitimate and okay to kill kids, babies, even up to 1 year of age, in case you still don't want them. He thinks that would be just fine. And how can they think that? But, again, it's because they see the world differently than we do. But so how can we tell, who's to say which way is better? And how are you going to decide that one? So I'm kind of starting this new series, which I think you'll find interesting. Hopefully you'll find interesting, biblical, and helpful. I'm going to try to keep it simple and practical, because that's the way my mind works. I like things simple and practical. But if you're following along on the sheet, point 1 there, it says there's this ancient Chinese proverb. It says, if you want to know what water is, don't ask the fish. Because the fish are totally immersed in it, and they really don't think about so much their environment. But you take a fish out, throw him on dry land, and he's starting to struggle for air. The fish realizes water is really, really important. Well, in much the same way, it's kind of like us. We are so immersed in our environment that often we don't take the time to reflect upon its impact on us. One guy, he's kind of a social watchdog, Daniel Yankovic. He says he defines culture this way: as an effort to provide a good set of answers to all the situations that confront us, throughout the passage of our lives. Well, and we're seeing a lot of cultural shifts nowadays. We're shifting from way things used to be seen. For example, again, just take marriage. It always has been basically defined the biblical way, one man, one woman for marriage. And interesting, I've just heard something maybe a week or two ago about how more and more people, even in America, are now, if you hold that view, they don't view you as just being old-fashioned or quaint. No, they view you as being very harmful and very discriminatory. And so they want that out. It's not just, you can keep that, but we're going to do our thing. No, they don't want you to keep that. They see that as very harmful to society to believe that. So it's the shift. So it's not just you go your way, I'll go mine, but it's no, everyone goes our way, and the rest of you, if you don't, you're dangerous. So we see some of these things, and these changes going on at a fast pace, and it affects all the big questions in life too. And what's at stake is, how do we understand the world around us, and who gets to say how we are to understand it? So these are worldview issues. Christians always have recognized there's a spiritual battle raging for the hearts and minds of mankind today. It's this cosmic spiritual battle that's going on around us. And it's a battle for Christian truth versus kind of a morally indifferent, might be one word to use, culture. On the one hand, what it really, when it comes down to, is that we have on the one hand, Christians, we see God as the final authority. So when it comes to theology, when it comes to morals, when it comes to life, who gets to have the final say? And Christians say, well, God gets to have the final say. Well, you have the cultural elites, on the other hand, saying, well, there is no God. They've tossed God out, so therefore God can't have the final say because there is no God, so mankind gets the final say. So who's the authority? It really comes down to that, all these issues. Does God have the final authority? Does he get to say, how we look at marriage and gender and all these things? Or does man get to say where to look at these things? So, we'll see how all these issues will be affected by that. Well, so they say, mankind is all there is. So we get to decide for ourselves, or at least those who have power, they get to decide for us. So it's very important that we develop a Christian worldview. How do we view the world? So we think biblically. Because again, everyone has a worldview. No one, you cannot not have one. Your grandmother has one. Every person alive, if they're alive, has one. A 2-year-old has one. 2-year-old, their view thinks the world revolves around them. They're the center of everything. A secular humanist believes this world is all there is. You live, you die, that's it. Christians think we have a soul. The atheists say you have no soul. You have, that's their worldview. You have Buddhists who think that you can purify yourself, you can save yourself through going through a series of self-purification measures. So all these different ways of looking at things. Another way of looking at it, too, to kind of consider this, is to kind of consider it, it's kind of like looking at a jigsaw puzzle. So I have this little jigsaw puzzle that our granddaughter likes. It's not very many pieces. It's what? It's about that many pieces. Peppa Pig. She's big now. In case you don't know or something, Peppa Pig is big with the young kids. But you could compare it to like a jigsaw puzzle. In other words, you put the puzzle, you dump out the pieces, and you go, well, how does this thing supposed to look? And so you look at the picture, unless you're Al Wickman, then who's the only guy who never looks at the instructions on how to build something. And then when he builds something, it turns out looking better than the thing on the box. And you go, how does he do that? It's a gift. But for the rest of us, we have to look at the picture of, for building a shelf or whatever. And because then, so you can put it together. And some of you maybe love jigsaw puzzles. Maybe you're good at those, 1,000-piece puzzles or 1,500 pieces. And I'm not really big on jigsaw puzzles. Maybe I just don't have the patience for it. One thing I have discovered is that if you have a big enough hammer, you can just about make any piece fit just about anywhere. So if you need help with a jigsaw puzzle, just give me a call, and we can take care of that for you. But Christians believe that there is a big picture for life too, not just for a puzzle. But a lot of people say, no, there is no big picture for life. You're free to make it up as you go, and then you die, and that's period. That's it. Game over. And so who's right? And that's right. Again, the jigsaw puzzle can be a helpful picture with that. If you're following it, looking at the sheets for point 2, it says, why is this important? Perhaps you've seen or heard of Barna Research, is a huge polling company, and a recent poll that they gave, and we might have that up here too. Percentage of people with a biblical worldview declines with age, and you get down to Generation Z, only 4% of them have what they consider a biblical worldview. You even get to the older, boomers, only 10%. And they said even when they measured even those who consider themselves Christians, only about 9% of them they figured actually had kind of a biblical view of things. In other words, I think they gave them a set of questions, 8 or 9 questions, something like that, or statements, affirmations, that they took, from the scriptures, and they said, do you believe this one? Do you believe this one? And most people believed some of them, this one, but I don't believe that, or I believe, so that's how they would say, well, you really don't have a biblical worldview. You've kind of pick and choose what you believe. But anyway, whatever the exact percentages are, it doesn't really so much matter. It's small. People who really look at the world through a biblical lens, that get their big picture of what's life all about from the scriptures. That's really kind of what it's saying. George Barna, he said this, although most people own a Bible and know some of its content, our research found that most Americans have very little idea how to integrate core biblical principles to form a unified, meaningful response to the challenges and opportunities of life. Kind of some big statement there. But we believe that the Bible gives us important and accurate information to understand life. That it doesn't. That not only does it contain stories and so on, and many interesting stories and theological teaching and so on. That's true. But the Bible is also much more than that. The Bible is also very accurate in its history. Archaeology is sometimes an archaeologist is dumbfounded by, again, how accurate this thing is. Anyway, it is. It's a history book that reveals kind of all the major events that are foundational to the Bible's message. And, sadly, generations have been brought up to see this as just, again, a bunch of stories and things that doesn't really deal with physical reality. They think it just kind of deals with abstract spiritual truths, and so therefore they get surprised when they find out that the Bible actually has answers to very real world problems like racism, like gender identity, like answering some of the big questions of life, even things like what happened to the dinosaurs and fossils and where did death come from, and things that the atheists have tried to answer and they really have no answers for. And sometimes it struck me too. Why do we sometimes say, and we I've done it. Let me tell you a Bible story. Well, it is a story, but why don't we say, let me share this account in history that actually happened. So it's not just a story. Like Aesop's fables are stories. They are. There's a lot of stories there, but they are grounded in history. You can go back and look at these things and see how they actually occurred. And so you really could say it's almost like a history Bible or history book of the universe. It gives actual historical events. Adam was a real guy. He was created on day 6. He and Eve got into trouble and they sinned, and that's brought on a lot of the things we're seeing today goes back to there. And there really was a catastrophic worldwide flood that totally changed the weather, which we're still experiencing the ramifications of. And there really was the Tower of Babel, where God divided the peoples into various languages, and how that's affecting us also to this day. And Jesus Christ was a real person who lived, he died, he rose again, and died for as a payment for the sins of his people. And one day he's coming back soon. And so the Bible is true, it can be trusted. But if we can't believe the Bible, even as history, even beginning in Genesis, then why should we then believe it's the gospel message that comes on, that's also presented, even starts there back in Genesis chapter 3. Or if the Bible's history can't be relied upon, even from the very beginning, from Genesis 1, then at what point can you start trusting it? By the time we get to Exodus, you can trust it then. How about, Jeremiah? How about in the Gospels? We can start trusting it then. At what point? No, the Bible is true. It can be trusted. It's been hammered at so many times, and they have not even created a tiniest little crack in it. It's standing strong. But this is important, because we're not born with a biblical view of things. We have to be taught it. And we have to teach ourselves, our kids, grandkids. And this way of looking at the world is constantly under siege today. It's constantly trying to be bombarded and to be diluted, to be watered down. And the non-biblical view of looking at things isn't just some passive thing that's out there that if you want to go discover it, you can. We're being bombarded with it every hour, every day, through TV, through film, through music, through books, through academia, through art, magazines, constant. This non-biblical view of things we're being bombarded with. You don't have to look for it. It will find you constantly. And so that's why we live in a very selfish, fallen world. And these ideas appeal to our flesh, and the problem is we often end up incorporating some of these ideas, and each of us, maybe some more so than others in various degrees, but often without even knowing it, and that's the problem. For example, one guy had a problem this way. Let me tell you what happened to one guy, Jeremiah. Let me read it from Jeremiah 15, and starting at verse 15, and just share kind of what happened with him. Jeremiah 15, it says, "Then I said, Lord, I'm suffering for your sake. Punish my persecutors. Don't let them kill me. Be merciful to me and give them what they deserve. Your words are what sustain me. They bring me great joy, and they are my heart's delight. For I bear your name, O Lord God Almighty. I never joined the people in their merry feasts. I sat alone because your hand was on me. I burst with indignation at their sins. Why then does my suffering continue? Why is my wound so incurable? Your help seems as uncertain as a seasonal brook. It's like a spring that has gone dry." The Lord replied, to Jeremiah, if you return to me, I will restore you so you can continue to serve me. If you speak words that are worthy, you will be my spokesman. You are to influence them. Do not let them influence you. He says, they will fight against you, but I'll make you as secure as a fortified wall. He says, I'll keep you safe. I'll rescue you, God's telling him. Well, here Jeremiah was given a tough task. God told him, I want you to preach my word to these people, but no, they don't want to hear. They're not even going to listen to you. And so he goes out and he's preaching God's messages, and the people they're not. He's experiencing persecution, and he comes back and he complains to God, God, what's going on? Where are you? Where's your help? Here I'm doing what you told me to do. If it was up to me, I'd be out sitting on the beach, the Mediterranean beach somewhere. But no, here I'm doing what you told me to, and look what's happening. Nobody's listening. Everybody hates me. They're calling me names. They're trying to shout me down. No, they're even trying to kill me. God, where are you? And and he even hints that God is maybe kind of a little unfaithful. He says, your help is kind of like a seasonal brook. It's sometimes there, sometimes it's not there. God, you're not really faithful here. Have you ever felt that way? Sometimes you get in a situation and you wonder that, God, where are you? I thought you'd help me. I thought you'd get me out of this. And I love God's response here that he gives to Jeremiah. And he basically says, look, Jeremiah, if you will return to me. In other words, Jeremiah was straying now. And he says, and if you quit saying all these nonsense words, worthless things, he says, then I'll let you continue to be my spokesman. The implication is that if you're not going to, if you're going to continue spouting this nonsense about me being a little unfaithful, about me being not reliable, that's nonsense, Jeremiah. You're the one who's unfaithful. I'm never me. And so he's kind of correcting Jeremiah. What you're saying now is nonsense talk. And then notice what he says. I love this statement. He says, Jeremiah, he says, you're not supposed to let this culture influence you. You're supposed to be influencing them. And see, he was letting some of their ideas that, God's not always there, he's not always faithful, and he was being affected by that. That was the environment he was in. It was starting to influence them, and God corrects him and says, hey, you need to cut that out. You're listening to them. Shape up, and I'll still use you. If you don't shape up, I'll find someone else who will share my messages, and I'll bless them, and their name will be remembered forever. And that's what happens all too easily to us too. We let the ideas of the world around us influence us, often in ways we're not even aware of. We start worrying because everyone else is worrying about something. And yet God says in Philippians 4, he tells us not to worry. But what are we to do? He says, take your worries and turn them into prayers, and let me do the worrying for you. Because I made you, I created you, I care for you. But you got to trust me. And I love that. Turn your worries into prayers. Let me do your worrying for you. So we can trust him. But quickly, there's some other applications too that can be made from this whole subject that I'm kind of just introducing today. Other practical applications in the sense that having seen things the way the Bible sees things gives us a map of reality. It helps us see the way the world, the way it really is, without looking at through rose-colored glasses. Or a Christian worldview helps us to defend our faith. It shows us that biblical morals really are the best morals out there. They are the wisest ones. Having seen what the Bible has to say helps us having a biblical view of human nature, which is important to see that correctly so we can build a strong self-image. Helps us deal with the issues of today, again, like racism or gender identity. Helps us to evangelize. It even helps show us how we can use all this modern technology, how we can use that without letting that use us. That's a big problem today. With all the social media, all the people on smartphones, they're on their phones and they fall into holes in the ground because they're not looking, and they're so entrenched in it. But how, some just say, well, I'm just going to avoid it all and not do any of that. Well, That's one answer, but most people can't do that with their work. Their life won't let them. So how do we use modern technology? How do we use it without letting it use us? That's a Bible gives us help on that. It gives us a wise perspective on things like, what really is a marriage, what makes up a good self-image, how do we understand the arts, the recreation, proper view of work. It helps us to see how faith and honest science go together really well. So all these things. So where is this series going? Let me put it this way. We're going to look at one way to organize all the major events of world history from a biblical perspective. There can be other ways, and it depends on how complicated you want to make it, but I'm going to keep it fairly simple. Because too many people have bits and pieces of the Bible. They know a little bit here, a little bit there. Again, like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, but they don't have the big picture. And I want to give you an overall framework to help understand the overall message of the Bible and how the pieces fit in. Now, to help with that, I found this, and so I decided to go ahead and just use this. I like it. I think it's very good. Let's see. Can I get some? Or Tim, you want to grab the other end of this? You're not going to be able to see it from there. The print is too small, but we'll actually put it up. Maybe you've heard of this before, the 7 C's of history. And what it does is that this is from Answers in Genesis. And so I came across this and I thought, I will use that. And what it shows, and we're going to actually spend then, it gives us an overall framework of the major events that happen in the world from a biblical perspective. And so it starts off with creation. God really did create things. We're going to spend on these 7 C's one Sunday on each of these 7. And God really did create the world, and then shortly thereafter, there was a big corruption, put it that way, when Adam and Eve sinned, and the effects that brought on to us that we're still experiencing today. And then after that, we had that tremendous catastrophe of the worldwide flood, and how that changed things. And then shortly after that, the confusion that came when at the Tower of Babel, when people tried to be like God and replace God, and God spread them out over the face of the earth and gave them different languages, and then how that leads up to Christ, who came and again changed everything at that point, and the cross and the message of the cross that's gone out throughout all the world, and leading up to again how God is going to one day soon consummate all things in Christ. So all those who've placed their faith in Him will one day experience the new heavens and the new earth. And of course, you can fit the world events into that. And again, so I'm just showing it to you. I know you can't read it from there. It's too small a print. I have trouble reading it from here. But we will put that up, and so you can see that. But that's kind of going to be an outline. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Tim. You can have an extra cookie today then, or something for being good, like helping. No, thanks. And it helps answer in many other ways too. Knowing these things, these kind of major events, this major framework, helps us to understand too, it deals with the big questions of life. Questions that everybody answers in one way or the other, whether they're aware of it or not. Questions like, where did we come from? How did I get here? The atheists and agnostics have one answer to that. Christians have another answer to that. And questions like, how did I get here? Why am I here? That's a big question. Does my life have a purpose? Atheists say no, absolutely positively your life cannot have a purpose. You can make one up for yourself. But an overall purpose, no, you cannot have a purpose. Every atheist who's honest will say, because you're here, you die, you're over. Your only purpose is to pass your DNA along to the next generation. Well, the Bible has a different answer on why we're here, and in terms of ultimate purposes. And our other big questions like, okay, if I have a purpose, what's the best way to live? who determines what is a good life? A Buddhist might say a good life is like this. And an agnostic might say, no, a good life is like this. A Muslim might say, no, this is a good life. What does the Bible have to say? And then the question, why am I here? Or who am I? It's a huge question. Like I mentioned, you would think that's, that teenagers would be worrying about that. But like I mentioned, Jen Wilkins, she's an older gal, speaks at women's conferences all around the country. I mentioned this a few weeks ago. She said the number one question she gets from women of all ages is this question, who am I? And you would think, you should know by now. But that's still the biggest question she gets. Who am I? And then, of course, the other big question, too, what happens when I die? The moment I die, what happens next? Well, the Bible has answers for all that, but a lot of people don't know. And especially you look in society, they're clueless. And so these are big questions, obviously, important questions, good questions. And as we go through this outline, we will be looking at some of those as well. So I'm hoping to give an overall framework for understanding not only the Bible's message and its pieces and how it fits in, but our world as well. And I think that will help us better understand some of these strange things that we see going on today. We have this verse, I think we got it too on Colossians 2, verse 8. Oh, that's pretty good how you found that right away. So there it is. But yeah, don't let anyone capture you with empty philosophies and high-sounding nonsense that come from human thinking and from the spiritual powers of this world, rather than from Christ. So it's a big assignment, but I think you'll find it helpful. I think you'll find it enjoyable. We're going to make it biblical. But for now, what are some ways that you see in yourself or in your family or in others how our culture is influencing us the way we think or what we do, the things we're concerned about, whether it be in politics, whether it be in morals. Bernard of Clairvaux lived back in the 1100s. He said this, some seek knowledge for the sake of knowledge, that is curiosity. Others seek knowledge so that they themselves may be known, that is vanity. But there are still others who seek knowledge in order to serve and edify others, and that is charity. And that's really the essence of what we're trying to do in this series, is bringing every thought, like in the verse I mentioned earlier, 2 Corinthians 10, bringing every thought captive to the Lordship of Christ so that we may better help and serve others. It's a high calling. It's a tough challenge, but it's one we need. It's one our kids need. It's one our grandkids need, because if they're going to be able to stand strong, or if we're going to be able to stand strong in this very bewildering situation in which we're in. And many are not standing strong today. So I'm going to stop there. We'll start with that first C next week then. Well, let's pray. Lord, thank you again so much that your scriptures are true and accurate. We can count on them. It needs to be interpreted correctly, but Lord, thank you that you give us your Spirit to help us do that, and many other helpful resources as well. So that's a doable task. Lord, help us to understand it. Help us to see the big picture better so that we can better fit in all these little bits and pieces that we hear about and see about, and it gives us something that we can evaluate things against, and so that we can take our stand one way or the other. And Lord, help us too not to worry about what so many people worry about, because as you encouraged us, that we're not to worry, but to turn our worries into prayers and pray about everything. And really, in a sense, we can let you do our worrying for us. So in this new week, whatever we may face, Lord, help us to turn these concerns into prayers and to trust you with that. And help us to be aware of ways, too, like you told Jeremiah, don't let this culture influence you. You're supposed to influence them. Lord, give us insight into maybe ways we are being affected, and so that we might stand strong on your word and live that out in a good way. And so we pray this now in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen.